Hi, I'm Christine Tulley, Senior Writing Coach with Defend and Publish, and welcome to episode 21, Paralysis Writing Blocks. In episode 20, I mentioned that I'm going to run a couple of week series on different types of writing blocks to try to help you with your academic writing projects. I noted last week that not all academic writing blocks are the same. So last week, what we explored were technical problems. So in other words, you're blocked, you can't do any writing because you don't know what to do to solve a particular writing challenge. So I used the examples last week of not knowing when to quit on your literature review or what sources to include. And also the example of maybe having a new methodology that you've tried and not knowing how to write about that because you've never done that before. So I gave some strategies for solving technical problems last week. And I mentioned also last week that technical problems are usually solved if you can just figure out how to solve that particular challenge, and then you can keep going. You're blocked because you're stuck on that one thing. So in this episode, in episode 21, we are going to focus on just general paralysis writing blocks, meaning you say you're going to write and you don't do it. You sit down and try to write and you don't do it. It just doesn't happen for you. And if we're talking about paralysis, sometimes you might be stuck in a cycle where this has been going on for a while. For example, I'm working with one of our clients at Defend and Publish right now, and she said it was okay if I said something about this, but she had gone several months without writing because she knew she had to do it. She would actually sit down and try to do it. She followed the advice of trying to write in the morning, sit down, get started. You know, we always hear just get your seat in the, sit in the chair and it'll start happening, and to no avail. It just did not happen. And she was growing more and more frustrated that she would sit there and literally write nothing. So there are a couple of ways to overcome writer's block paralysis. And I was really interested in this problem because I think what happens in the academic writing support community is that we keep telling people, oh, if you just have the right advice guide, or, oh, if you just have the right software, if you use Scrivener, it's going to be great. If you want to, if you are in a writing group, it's going to be great. And the fact is that sometimes, including me, and I love to write, and I generally don't have writer's block, it does happen to everybody. And you can have a bout of writing paralysis, a writing block. So I wanted to offer a couple of pieces of advice. I've got some that have worked actually for me when I've gotten stuck on something, where I've gotten into kind of a rut of not writing, but also it's a roundup from lots of different articles and sources about how to solve these kinds of days and weeks where you're just not writing. So I don't want to mention them specifically here because I've got several. So I'm going to link to all of them in the show notes. Also, I'll post them when I post this, the announcement for this episode on Twitter. So if you haven't been following us on Twitter, definitely join us. We release new podcast episodes every Monday. So you can find out, what the content is. But a lot of times I will just link show notes content right there in Twitter, and you can just grab it off of there. So we're just defend_publish. And I hope you'll be following us. If you follow us, we will follow you back. All right, so let's talk about paralysis. Here's an example. I'm going to throw myself up here first. This particular semester, normally I write, no problem. I do like to write. I've talked about my rituals on this podcast before. If you want to learn about those, specifically check out the podcast the episode about making writing an event. That's something that has really worked for me. That was probably the game changer to make my writing happen. So I wish I could remember the episode number for you. I cannot, but I will link it in the show notes. But just check it out and you can see it. You can always find all of our podcasts at Defend and Publish. And if you go to podcasts, they're all there with show notes, audio, YouTube, and links. Okay, so here's my problem. I finished a book manuscript at the end of February. So I turned in that manuscript. The timing was sort of perfect because right after that was the spring break for the semester. And I used that spring break to get caught up on my grading. And so I gave myself permission not to do any writing, take 1 week off, clean up my area where I'd been writing, for weeks and months and things like that. And, then just go ahead and start writing the next week. Well, what I found out was I couldn't start writing the next week. And that is kind of unusual for me because I have a pretty regular routine. I've been a professor for almost 20 years. It's usually not a problem, but I was really stuck. And when I got there, I couldn't figure out what the problem was because I already knew the next project I was working on. It was a short article for me, like it's about 15 pages. So a shorter scholarly article. I had done some of the legwork. I had done some of the content. I had a rough draft that was in pieces. So I wasn't starting from scratch. I knew what I was writing about. I had the audience and I had the journal. So there shouldn't have been any problem with getting going, but there was. And so that first day, I just sort of chalked it up to, well, my brain's just blown. I've been working on this book project for months and months and months. And, too soon. I'm just going to take another morning off. Not a big deal. So I'll come back tomorrow. I came back the next day, that Tuesday, nothing. I just sat there, nothing. And, this has really given me some new empathy for other writers that struggle with this, that sit there, because it's all fine and wonderful for me to say, oh, well, just go to the library and write. That's what I do. But that wasn't what I was doing. So it actually gave me, a better understanding of some ways to how to solve this particular problem. And at least for me, this went on for about 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks, which is a long period of time for me. And I ended up solving this problem in a couple of creative ways. And then I'll throw out some other suggestions people have given. One of the things that I decided to do was to get away from my computer, get away from any typing, and just walk. I have mentioned this before, but that turned out to be probably the biggest game changer. Because I think what has to happen sometimes with writing is we all know that it's partly a physical game, right? You have to get the words out of your fingers, or you have to sit in the chair for a long time, and it's physically taxing and all that. But it's also largely a mental game, and not just the mental, meaning the academic knowledge that's all stored in your brain. You really have to do something inside your brain to figure out, how you're going to go about things. And so what I ended up doing was just deciding that during my writing time, every morning, I was going to take a walk for an hour, just around my neighborhood. No, no big deal. There were a couple of rules. I could not be listening to super, fun, jazzy, working out music. So that was a no, but I could listen to classical or, instrumental or anything like that. And all I did was just walk around. And my other rule was I had to be thinking about that project. So that's all I did for all week. That during my writing time, I didn't take any notes. I didn't try to capture anything I thought about. I just thought about it. And for me, that really moved the needle, because at the end of the week, then I had a time where I was sitting in the car waiting for one of my kids. I had about a half an hour, and I always have notepads and paper in the car to make grocery lists and all that. And I decided, since I had that half hour, I would try to remember things that I had thought about during the week. And it really gave me some new insight, because one of the things that I think was the problem was I knew that my writing was just functional and flat. And that's not the type of writing I like to do. I like to give it some zest and work in some great transitions and have the sentences sound great. And the joy that I get from academic writing was just not showing up. So I didn't even know that was happening, but until I had thought about it. So that was one thing. The other thing that I thought of is, as I was walking, I realized one thing that I had in there was just sort of a very functional structure to organize some interviews or some interview data that I had used for this article. And it would be very serviceable. It'd be very user friendly. People could figure out everything. But what I figured out was that my interviews weren't actually synthesized in any way where I was actually having the interviews kind of speak to each other. So this is difficult to say without seeing the piece. And when the piece is published, I will certainly go back and link it into the show notes. But that was also a big breakthrough for me, because it kind of changed how I thought about what I was doing with the interview data. So those two things alone gave me enough that I could scribble down on a notepad some ideas and directions where to start. And then that next Monday, I took that notepad into the library, I had my computer, and I was able to just start playing and moving things around. And that moved the needle for me. So that was just one example of how you might solve it. There are some other things that have been found to be helpful. A second piece of advice that I found, this is not my piece of advice, but it's kind of related to me going for my walk and having physical exercise, is that there's some advice out there that says just shut off your screen. That screens interfere with us in a way that, I mean, we're all aware of it. We all have Zoom fatigue. I'm Zooming right now to talk to you, but we are now getting the sense, of course, with like using our computers and our screens, that we're being watched. And that just adds another layer of pressure where you feel like you're being watched as you're writing, if that makes sense. So there's a lot that's been shown that if you cannot make it happen with your keyboard, just close the lid and get out paper and start either making notes, mind mapping, drawing. You can do any of those kinds of things to help you. You've also seen, if you've been following me on Twitter, I have pictures of how I use whiteboards in the library. When I can't do it on the keyboard, sometimes I can do it with markers on a whiteboard. And then I'll just take a picture of that and then use that whiteboard to capture what I need onto a keyboard. So I'll put a picture of that in the show notes and also post that on Twitter. Other quick things that I think might work. One of the things I also love is the strategy I use, but I'm sure other people have found this one too, is after a while, I don't like sitting at my computer to do it. But as I'm doing with this podcast right now, I could talk to you all day. And so I have found an app called Inkpad. I've mentioned it before, and I'll also put a little link to that in the show notes, that just audio records you talking onto these, they look like a computer generated yellow legal tablet. And I love that because it looks just like writing, like my real writing. And so sometimes I can just, instead of writing, just close the door to my office and have a whole conversation with myself about my project. And the wonderful thing about that is that Inkpad will let you download those notes and you can move them into Microsoft Word. They copy and paste. So I'm a big fan of Inkpad, and it's free. It works on Androids, it works on phones, it works on computers. It's fabulous. So I will put that in there. So that's another thing that can work. Another thing that is shown in their research is just trying to do very small bits of writing until you can get yourself going again. This is a strategy that I haven't tried personally, but a lot of people have argued that it's a way to just increase your exposure to writing, because we know with paralysis, sometimes once you're paralyzed, you can't move forward. And sometimes the only way to move forward is in a very, very tiny step. So what that might look like for you is that you still have your regular writing time. You try writing for just 5 minutes and then you're done for the day, and then move on to like 6 minutes or 10 or 15 or however you want to segment that. And one of the things that when I counsel clients, people get worried about is they're like, I'm wasting so much time. I'm not writing because I'm taking a walk, or I'm taking 5 minutes on writing and I need to write for 8 hours today on my dissertation. I would argue that your time is much better spent trying to calmly short circuit this problem before it blows up into something bigger. Because even for me, even for somebody with really, I would argue, good habits, motivated to write, I had the content and I couldn't do it. I had to just say, okay, I can't do it. I have to think of another way to solve this. So I'm hoping that gives you some encouragement this week. Certainly if you have any questions, or feedback on this, you can definitely always, and I should have said this in every podcast, but we always welcome any feedback you have. If you want to email me at Christine@defendandpublish.com, certainly we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have or ask questions on Twitter. We're always looking for new episode ideas, new webinar ideas, but certainly if you've got other strategies, particularly that help with paralysis, if you have a writing block paralysis, please share those, because honestly, everybody else in the academic writing community probably wants to hear those too. So happy writing this week, and we'll see you next week.